גפר עלינו חסדו, ואמת אדוני לעולם, הללויה, הללויה.
Shalom, shalom. My name is Jackie Fierman. I'm with Ariel Ministries Canada, and the YouTube channel is Ariel Ministries Canada Women. I am presenting the material of Dr. Arnold Fruchtenbaum, the founder of Ariel Ministries Worldwide, and that of Messianic leader Jacques Isaac Gabizon, who is the Canadian director of Ariel Canada, the Ariel Canada branch. So we're going to continue tonight with Daniel, and the first idea tonight is that you might think that chapters 3 and 4 are just separate from the first two chapters, because it's hard to find a link between the two, because some people have even gone so far as to say, well, there's just a whole different author for that, because it just seems so bizarre. It looks like somebody added some random information and some stories, and but there is a strong link. There is a relationship between those sections, and it's one that really speaks to our hearts. Because with Daniel 3 and the next time Daniel 4, we're moving from talking about the empire of Babel or Babylon to the heart of the king and of the people. And people say, if they were so smart, I mean, these weren't stupid people. How can those who are created in the image of God bow down to a lifeless statue? How could they forget what also Nebuchadnezzar, what he saw in the first episode with the statue being interpreted, the dream by Daniel? And you might think, well, only Israel are the hard of hearing, or the blind people who can't see the hand of God, whether it was through as they came out of Egypt, the burning bush, the Exodus. Things, well, it was Moses who saw the burning bush, but the cloud of fire, the pillar of cloud by day and fire by night, and did did how could they forget? But actually, it's not just a Jewish problem, it's really a worldwide one. And the thing is, it's the anatomy, if you will, of unbelief or disbelief. And that is the connection between chapters 1 and 2 and 3 and 4. And so we pray that you will be blessed by this chapter 3. We should get through the whole thing tonight, and to recognize the enemy that is even at our door, that of unbelief. You can turn to Daniel 3 if you're not there yet. I won't be reading all the verses out loud, so please follow along when I name the verse or the number. And it starts out, well, we can say that following the revelation of the king's dream in chapter 2, Nebuchadnezzar saw the hand of God. And at the end of chapter 2, in verse 47, he says, surely your God is a God of gods and a Lord of kings and a revealer of mysteries, since you've been able to reveal this mystery. So he saw the power, the exclusiveness of God, and or the God of Daniel anyway, because his magicians couldn't see into his thoughts. They even said nobody on earth can do that, and Daniel said that too. Nobody can, but God can. And but this is a number of years later. We don't know exactly how many years later. The king, after seeing the statue of all the different layers, and with him being the head, being gold, he made a whole statue. The whole thing was gold. And in the end, he forced people to worship it under threat of death. And did he not learn anything from the other episode? Because God gave him a personally tailored miracle, but for nothing. So that's why there seems to be a break in the chapters 1 and 2 with 3 and 4. But he sees another great miracle with three men, the three friends of Daniel, who refuse to bow down to the statue. They're thrown into an oven. They should have been burnt, instantly, but they were not burnt at all. Even their clothes didn't smell of fire. And we all know the story, but I think there will be some surprises for you when you see the depth of the teaching today that I will be sharing with you. And once again, he proclaims God's greatness. And you'd think, well, surely he converted. It's not a word that Jewish people use, the word convert, but um, the word means to turn, shuv in Hebrew, to turn around. But in chapter 4, he's going to have another dream, and once again, Daniel is going to be the only one who can interpret it, and he sees the hand of God, but he still doesn't believe. So he forgets God altogether, and he begins to worship himself, basically. So let's start with verse 1 of chapter 3. We see this construction, erection of this image of gold. And of course, he's the head of gold, so he makes the whole thing out of gold. And it's really an act of defiance, an act of rebellion. Remember, Babel means confusion, but it also stands for rebellion. That's why we see it in the book of Revelation. And he thinks Babylon will last forever. And, gold symbolizes that for him. According to the Septuagint, the Greek translation, this occurred in the 18th year of Nebuchadnezzar. And if so, then it was after Jerusalem fell. After his soldiers burnt Jerusalem, burnt the temple. You can read about it in 2 Kings 25, and I'll just read for you without it being a slide, verse 9, where it says, He burned the house of the Lord, that's the king's house, and all the houses in Jerusalem, and every great house he burned with fire. And people are still looking for the Ark of the Covenant, right? Well, they're not going to find it because the gold was taken off, obviously, except for the gold lid, which was pure gold, and it was probably taken whole or broken up into pieces. But there's no Ark anywhere now. That's silly. It was all, and it was only the temple was overlaid with gold. If you look at all the tabernacle furniture, it's made out of wood and then overlaid with gold. Isaiah talks about, there's a craftsman who casts an idol, and then a goldsmith plates it with gold, and that's the way things were. So what were the measurements of this thing? We see 60 cubits, which doesn't mean anything to me, but 90 feet seems pretty tall. A 9-story building is very tall. And it was 6 cubits wide, which means 9 feet wide. So 9 feet by 90 feet. Now, I had to look up how to pronounce this. We know about the decimal system. We grew up with that, and they used what was called a sexagesimal system. Now, what is that? That is the base 60. We use base 10. And so that's why it's 60 cubits by 6 cubits. Some people say, oh, it's 6, it's the number of man, it's not 7, which is God's number. Fine, you're allowed to go there if you want. But we see that this is something that was part of their culture, which is further proof, not the only proof, that this book really is from that era. Now, where was it put up? It says the plain of Dura. Now, we don't have a map that shows us that, but some will say maybe it was in the area of the Tower of Babel. We don't know. We just know it's a wide open area, and obviously there was a big furnace constructed next to it. And there is a call for the dedication of this large image in verses 2 and 3. And everybody in authority is called to go, and you can go down the list of all the people. And it included the satraps, and Daniel was considered a satrap. We see that in chapter 2. He was in charge of the province of Babylon, where the exiled Jewish people were, and they were all called to the dedication. Now, nothing is said about worshiping anything at this point. And so they all gather together, all the big shots. Verse 3, all the officers and, everybody obeys. And it includes the 3 friends. And they're allowed to go to a dedication. If you go to the dedication of a cenotaph or the Washington Monument, if you're in the United States, it's fine, no problem. Now, where's Daniel? Don't know. So we can't speculate. The rabbis do, but we're not going there. And then the command comes to worship all of a sudden. Oops, that was not what the 3 friends were expecting. And there was a royal herald in verse 4 who cries out and says, everybody, peoples, nations, languages, everybody has to worship. And the signal is when you hear this music. And there are many kinds of instruments. I won't read into that and say this means that, this instrument. We don't know. Look them up if you want. There's no real significance basically to all these different kinds of instruments. It's repeated a few times, but why? I don't know. And the requirement was to fall down on your face, prostrate, to do homage, to worship this thing. There is a motto that many pagan cultures say that the life of the state is in the law of the state. So, what does that imply? If you worship this God of the state, then you submit to that state. And so, if you imagine a conquered people, that's saying the God of the people who conquered us is more powerful than our God. And if you worship their God, then you are showing your allegiance to the state. And if you have 55 gods, it won't matter, because for a polytheist, it doesn't matter. And so this was simply a test of loyalty. And there's a modern example. It's not a pretty one, but it does come from Dr. Fruchtenbaum's notes. So I'll tell you, there is the head of the Hitler Youth who made a speech on July 29th, 1936. And he said, one cannot be a good German and at the same time deny God. But an avowal of faith in the eternal, boy, that's pompous, in the eternal Germany is at the same time an avowal of faith in the eternal God. If we act as true Germans, we act according to the laws of God. And whoever serves Adolf Hitler, the Fuhrer, serves Germany, and whoever serves Germany serves God. So that's the same idea. It's is Babylon. And what was the penalty for failure? Well, we know it was to be cast into this burning fiery furnace. I looked it up, and it seems like it was probably a lime kiln. Now, I've never seen a lime kiln, but basically, it's a cylindrical thing that's a little broader at the base than at the top. There's a hole at the top, and where they would throw the lime in, and then at the bottom, they would extract that fused lime. I'm not even sure what they used it for, to be honest. And there was some kind of a door at the bottom. Now, there weren't glass doors like we'd have today, but even in Lebanon, the Phoenicians made a kind of glass that was green, thick. And you couldn't see perfectly through it, but it was transparent somewhat. We don't know. Was it just a cutout in the stone? I don't know. And it says the same hour, meaning the same time in verse 7. And so the furnace was probably already there, and they erected this statue near it to drive their point home that you had to bow down. Maybe it was the king's idea from the beginning. We don't know. But there is an accusation because it's not hard. Everybody's bowing down, and 3 people are left standing. So in verses 8 to 12, it talks about these accusers, and it says, for this reason at that time, certain Chaldeans, certain ones came forward and brought charges against the Jews. Not all of them, because Daniel had just saved the life of some of those who were the magicians whose life was in danger when the first dream was unable to be told by them. So they owed their lives to him. But there were other ones. And it says against the Jews. So it is anti-Semitic. Now, the word accused in the Hebrew means to bring charges. It's a nasty word in Arabic, and it means to bite or to sting like a snake. It can also mean destruction. So their motives were full of malice, and the word Jew and bite were together, and so they were just, against the Jews. It's like, again, I tell Jewish people, do not read Leviticus 26 or Deuteronomy 28 before you go to bed. Very bad nighttime reading, and a lot of curses for disobedience. And one of them says, among those nations you shall find no rest, nor shall the sole of your feet have a resting place. This is what Jews in the diaspora, like me, we live. Not that I'm under a curse because I'm in Jesus, but I certainly suffer along with the non-remnant here in Montreal where there is anti-Semitism. So the idea is to devour piecemeal, this slanderous thing that devours people. If that's speaks to you today to stay away from slander, that's a good idea. And then the command comes a second time, verses 9 to 11. And Nebuchadnezzar says, "You hear that music? You got to fall down. And if you don't, you'll be cast in this fiery furnace." And so in verse 12, we see the accused. And it talks about certain Jews. There are certain Jews, which made me think right away of Haman and the way he worded things in Esther chapter 3, verse 8, where Haman says to King Ahasuerus, "There is a certain people scattered and dispersed among the peoples in all the provinces of your kingdom. Their laws are different from those of all other people, and they do not observe the king's laws. So it is not in the king's interest to let them live, to let them remain. Just kill them." It's the same kind of accusation. They're different people. So, and then in that accusation, it says, "Nebuchadnezzar, you appointed them over the affairs of the province of Babylon. It's like it's your fault that they're even here." And they're resentful, these Chaldeans, and they resent the Jews who were appointed these high offices and not them. So it says in verse 12, the second part, "They haven't respected you. They haven't regarded you. They don't respect the one who appointed them. They're not grateful. They don't serve your gods." Well, that was already known. "And they don't worship that golden image that you set up." So that's the disobedience to the highest degree. So let's hear what the three friends, the three Jewish men, have to say. And verses 13 to 18, Nebuchadnezzar challenges them, and well, he's enraged. He's furious, verse 13, and he commands that those three be brought before him. They're arrested, they're brought in, and confronts them in verse 14. He interrogates them. "Is it true? You don't serve my God. You don't worship the golden image." And Nebuchadnezzar doesn't owe them anything. Remember, it was not his idea to appoint them, it was Daniel's idea. And so, in a sense, he was saying to them, "You owe me. You owe me. I gave you this position. But I'll give you a second chance," verse 15. "Just do it now. Do it now and worship when the music starts. And if not, there will be this terrible penalty." And what God, he says, "who is that God that shall deliver you out of my hands?" Well, he's going to see very soon. And so there is defiance. Why is that defiance there? Remember, he was able to destroy Jerusalem and the temple with fire. So he was more powerful than Israel's God. So he knows that, or his God was more powerful. And so instead of what we saw at the end of chapter 2, where he says, "Your God is a God of gods," and all this, he seems to have let it go, or he was just one of the many gods. And the three Jewish people, their response in verses 16 to 18, it says, "Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego," their Babylonian names, replied to the king, "O Nebuchadnezzar," and you'll see in a minute the word "O" isn't even there, "we do not need to give you an answer concerning this matter." They kept their cool really well. "If it be so, our God whom we serve, he is able to deliver us from the furnace of blazing fire. He will deliver us out of your hand. But even if he doesn't, let it be known to you, O king, that we're not going to serve your gods or worship the golden image that you've set up." There's no arguing here, no deliberation. God is able to do it, and if he wants, he can deliver us, but if not, it's okay. We're not going to submit only if he delivers us. That's really true submission. And we're not going to serve your gods or this image. Now, there's something you might not have noticed. They don't say, "O King Nebuchadnezzar." They just say Nebuchadnezzar. And like I said, the word "O" isn't even there in Hebrew or in Aramaic. It's as if they're saying, "Hey, Nebuchadnezzar, wake up and smell the hummus. You're not a god, you're just Nebuchadnezzar." And then later they address him as "O King," like, "Okay, you're king. You've got the right to execute us if you want. But our souls, our minds, that you can't touch them." So they were living examples, if you will, of what Yeshua said in the Gospel of Luke, chapter 12, verses 4 and 5, when Yeshua says, "And I say to you, my friends, do not be afraid of those who kill the body, and after that, there's no more they can do. But I will show you whom you should fear. Fear him who, after he is killed, has power to cast you into hell." Yeah, I say to you, fear him. They were living examples of that, and they lived by that. And so, verses 19 to 23, yes, they are cast into the furnace. And Nebuchadnezzar says, "Turn up the heat," which actually means they won't suffer as long. They'll be burnt up or die faster. He was so furious, he doesn't take all their nice clothing off. His face is all distorted from rage in verse 19. And he commands that they be executed in verse 20. Certain men come, strong men, to carry them away. They're all tied up, and they're supposed to be cast into this furnace, and that's what they do in verse 21. They had expensive clothing on. Those are the words. Hosen is not a word that I use. In some translation, it says trousers, but it was something very fancy. Persian pants, like, or Babylonian pants, I guess. They were wearing tunics or turbans, very special coats or mantles. They got dressed up for the dedication of this thing. They came dressed for the occasion. They had what it took and they came all dressed up. But they're not going to worship. And the fact that they didn't even bother to take all that nice clothing off to keep it for themselves, that shows how fast they wanted this decree carried out. And obviously the rage of the king. So in verse 22, they are thrown. Obviously, there was some way to get up to the top of this thing. That's how they put the lime in to begin with. And but who dies? The executioners, because the king's order to turn up the heat only kills his own men. And they bring the three men tied up to the top and throw them in. But the executioners couldn't get away alive. The flame in there leaps out of the opening and kills them. Now, I think that's the Abrahamic covenant verse, Genesis 12. I will bless those who bless you, and the one who curses you, him will I curse. And this is, you tried to kill us, you're going to die. And so they fall down, still tied up in the furnace. So isn't it a paradox, an interesting paradox that those outside the furnace die, but those inside live? Wow. Okay, now let's talk about the deliverance, verses 24 to 27. Nebuchadnezzar sees a miracle and he's astonished. In verse 24, he said, "Didn't we throw three men in?" Yeah, yeah, sure. Counselors say, "Sure, that's true, O king." And in verse 25, he says, "Wait a minute, I see four, not three. And guess what? They're not even tied up." So guess what? The fire burned off their ropes or whatever they used to tie them up with. It burnt the ropes, but not their coat, not their hats, not anything. Just the ropes. You talk about a miracle right there. So the fire was used for their benefit and not for their hurt, which only our God, right? And they're walking around in this fire or this furnace, and they're not lying down, they're not standing stiff, they're not trying to get out, they're just walking around. They have no hurt. The Aramaic says there's no harm upon them. They're not burning, they're not roasting, horrible barbecuing. And now comes a bit of a question. People say, "Oh, that's Jesus with them." Well, it doesn't really say that. Nebuchadnezzar says the aspect of the fourth is like unto a son of the gods. It doesn't say the Son of God. How would he know about the Son of God? Huh? He doesn't know anything about the Son of God. That's not even been mentioned in Scripture, even if he had access to Scripture, which he didn't. So what he does know about are angels. And so, in Babylonian theology, we'll see later in verse 28, he quotes the idea of an angel. That was in their thinking. And so there's a call to come out of the furnace in verse 26. He gets as close as he dares to the door. And the three Jewish friends just walk around. They're not trying to leave. They stay in the furnace until the king commands them to come out. Okay, now we'll just walk out. And so the officers examine them, verse 27, and they check them out. And the fire had no power on their bodies. Their hair wasn't singed. I mean, you know how easy it is to singe hair. You don't even have to get the flame on your hair, just close. It says their hosen, their pants, were not harmed. They had no smell of fire or smoke, which we know that's an absolute miracle. And guess what? That is a beautiful image of what will happen to the faithful remnant. This is written to the Jewish remnant because the book of Isaiah is written to Jewish people. Look at Isaiah 43, verse 2, which I'm sure you've heard quoted for all kinds of situations, but this really is originally directed, the context is to the faithful Jewish remnant in the tribulation when it says, "When you pass through the waters, I will be with you, and through the rivers, they will not overflow you. When you walk through the fire, you will not be scorched, nor will the flame burn you." And that's the context of this verse. I know you've probably seen it or heard it many places. So, how does Nebuchadnezzar respond? Verses 28 to 30. New decree, new decree. He recognizes God's power. So, when he said, "What God can deliver you?" He's got his answer now. God sent his angel and delivered those three Jews. And so those three Jews, by their disobedience, actually changed the king's word. They yielded their bodies. We're not going to serve your God. And what is the new decree? Verse 29. I mean, these kings, they can be full of themselves and make decrees all over the place. Oh, new decree. Verse 29, I make a decree that any people, nation, or tongue that speaks anything offensive against the God of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego shall be torn limb from limb, and their houses reduced to a rubbish heap. We'll see what that means. We've seen it before, inasmuch as there is no other God who can deliver in this way. So he's calling all the same people that he spoke to before, the peoples, languages, nations, all this. You can't even speak against the God of these three Jews. And does he really come to faith? No, he still doesn't. We'll see that soon. And if you speak against that God, then you're going to be cut into pieces and your house will be turned into a public latrine, public outhouse, because there's no other God who can save like this. Now, the three Jewish men already had good positions, but now he confers wealth on them in verse 30. They now are given wealth, and they were willing to lose it all. And now they gain riches. Where are they for the rest of the Bible? We don't know. We'll meet them in heaven. But they're not mentioned ever again. But there are some lessons, and it what did serve to the other exiles at the time, and say, idolatry, because Babylon was huge, right? And later Persia. So when you are in exile, don't yield to idolatry. That's an important thing. And we're still in the times of the Gentiles, and there are going to be temptations toward assimilation. We just finished Kristallnacht, the observation for 2 days, when Germans, destroyed Jewish businesses and houses of worship. And so many German Jews were just trying to blend in and not be, noticeable, but it didn't work. And so even though we're tempted to be assimilated and accultured into this Gentile world, Jewish people were called to remain Jews. I mean, you can't make me into somebody Chinese, but I can try and act like I'm not a Jew, I guess. And another lesson is that during the times of the Gentiles, there are Jews who will reach prominent positions, like the three friends did, and there's going to be jealousy, like the Chaldeans who are like, why didn't we get those jobs? And so that increases anti-Semitism. And regardless of the severity of persecution, a remnant will always survive. And so during the times of the Gentiles, like now, yes, there is a remnant among the Jews. I'm part of that. And than during the time of the Great Tribulation, for sure. So I'm just going to close with a very short illustration that Mr. Gabizon brought out about eagles. Now, you've maybe seen an eagle fly, and you've probably heard this verse from Isaiah 40, when in verse 31, he says, "Those who wait for the Lord will gain new strength. They will mount up with wings like eagles. They will run and not get tired. They will walk and not become weary." Now, if you've seen an eagle, you know they're really huge, and they can't just flap around all day long like a sparrow or a robin. That's how most birds fly. They flap their wings, but eagles can't flap very long. They are built for soaring. And once in the air, they seek their invisible columns of hot air that are called thermals, and they help them rise very high. Eagles can't see them, nobody can, but they know when they're there, and when they find them, they fly into these invisible currents, stretch out their wings, and they're lifted really high. And they can go very fast too, between 60 and 100 miles an hour, and they can go 14,000 feet up where you can't even see them with the naked eye. And so Mr. Gabizon reminds us, and he says, let's remember that the word for wind in Hebrew, ruach, and Greek, I think it's pneumos, they're the same word that's used for the Spirit. And with the Spirit, you and I, like Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah, we can also fly very high and soar with him. So that's going to be the end of our study for today, and I pray this was a blessing to you and that you will continue with us. You can always subscribe if you would like to be notified whenever the video is edited and available. And just a quick thank you to those who have sent in gifts for my support. I appreciate it. And see you next time. Shalom, shalom.
הללו את אדוני כל גויים.